We can define Sat Yoga as the art and the science of increasing our intelligence. In most of our educational systems today, our intelligence is considered as a given, not something to work on. We use whatever intelligence we have developed to study particular disciplines. But the discipline of intelligence development itself has been overlooked in many institutions. But this is what yoga has always been about, and yoga is perhaps the most ancient practice of humanity that has a historical lineage that goes back to earliest times, that has been documented anthropologically and archaeologically. And the intention has always been to attune to the intelligence of that power that has designed the cosmos, and to attune to the very subtle information that comes through vibrational waves that we can perceive when our mind is in the most subtle and silent state of total presence. And in that state, we receive information from the environment, and we receive information from deep within, and we receive information from the superconscious. These various levels of consciousness have been basically forgotten about in the modern paradigm of scientism. But those who have experienced altered states of consciousness, one way or another, recognize that there is far more to consciousness than our chattering mind, or our capacity for two-valued logic, or our ability to relate as bodily beings. There's a great deal more that can enrich our lives and enable us to navigate life in a much more accurate and graceful manner, to achieve a much more fulfilling life, and a life that can be of service to humanity and to the planet in a much higher way, because the more intelligence that we have that we can apply to the problems of the world, the more likely we are to be able to solve them. And so I would assert that the world is now facing dire problems that threaten the very existence, not only of the human species, but of life on the planet, because our intelligence has fallen to too low a level, and we can no longer manage the complexity of life, nor the Frankensteinian development of weapons of mass destruction, that we do not have the emotional maturity to protect ourselves from misusing. The problems that we face are almost impossible to solve at the level of the ordinary human ego. And what we must understand is that the ego, as we know it today, is a form of artificial intelligence. It's not our natural intelligence. It's a very recently developed form of consciousness. The further we go back in history, the less present and the less hegemonic the ego form was. The soul form of consciousness was at a much higher level of value and appreciation, and had a much larger and wider power to attract and to embody itself. And before that, if we go back further, there was a level of consciousness much higher than that of what is termed in mythological or religious terms the soul, that of the spirit. Religious terms are not particularly useful in the science of yoga, but the problem is there aren't very many Western scientific terms that we can use since the concept of soul has been thrown out by most modern psychology, and the study of consciousness is usually centered upon the study of neuroscience, not of consciousness itself. And so for that reason, there is not a clear understanding of the structure and the possibility of morphologically shifting that structure and dynamic functioning of consciousness. But consciousness is the super tool that we have available to us to solve problems if we know how to use it, if we can master the mind rather than be subject to it. But the ego is an artifact that was created in early childhood when you were acquiring language, and it was based upon projections and impositions of axioms and belief systems and loyalties and fears and desires and various pathological aspects of the family system you were raised in that have remained part of the programming of the ego. And it is this programming that limits the capacity of your intelligence to increase itself, because the ego has embedded within it a censoring agency that holds back information that it doesn't think you want to know. And because of the ego doesn't want to know many things, some that are forbidden to be known, some that are too unbearably painful to be known, some that are socially incorrect, politically incorrect, and that are that would make one somewhat of an outcast if one understood that knowledge, would make one perhaps even seem mad to others who don't have that knowledge. The bottom line is that most people in ego consciousness choose subconsciously, not consciously, to not develop their intelligence beyond a level that is adapted to the herd mentality and to that level of consciousness that can assure that you can get a job and hold a life of an ordinary type in society. But since society itself is sick and maladapted to the environment that we have created in the world, we are in a situation of a catch-22. The more adapted you are, the more maladapted you are. This creates a paradoxical situation that can only be resolved by rising to a higher level of consciousness, in which the, let's say, the aspects of reality that today we cannot make sense of, and the problems that we cannot solve, can be understood to be easily solvable. But they're only solvable if we are able to receive and understand all of the information that is available to us as inhabitants of a cosmos that is actually made of information. And so the science of yoga uses the modern sciences that are congruent with it, which include quantum physics, include complexity theory and chaos theory, and all of the various other theories that have been recently downloaded by scientists, because they are on the right track of, again, returning to the understanding that consciousness, not matter, is at the basis of reality. The materialist paradigm, however, has taken over the educational system for 100 years, as has the Darwinian paradigm and the various other paradigms that involve atheistic understandings in which the universe must be considered random and not based upon an intelligent design. And as long as we are comfortable with that paradigm, that frame of reference will not allow us to receive information that is not congruent with it. And it will therefore keep us in a state in which we perhaps feel comfortable as scientists who can relate with their peers, but will not be able to give us the access to our genius that is inherent to that level of our consciousness that is supernormal. and that transcends the dualistic mind that's embedded in language and mathematics and in the imagery in which we tend to live our lives, but is based at a higher level of symbolic understanding that requires more than a two-valued logic and requires an attunement to an intelligence that transcends the illusion of multiplicity and duality. But that origin of consciousness from which the multiplicity of the planet and all of its various species and forms of life and matter, materialistic, material beings that seem to be solid and physical, but that we know now are based on vibrational frequencies. If we understand this accurately, then we are able to have an effect upon reality that goes far beyond what we can now technologically accomplish. So what yoga promotes and encourages is an understanding that we can develop a psychotechnology that enables us to access and download information that will be able to solve those problems that our own minds at too low a level have created.